Is the third webinar in our 4-webinar series that TWC is hosting. A couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our guest today. We have had 2 past webinars on the topics of curbside appointments and telemedicine. Those are on our website, twcinc.com or twcinc.com. If you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type those into us. We'll leave a little bit of Q&A session for everyone at the end. If we do not get to those questions, we will follow up via email. And if you happen to watch any of our past webinars and have questions, hit us up at info@twcinc.com and we can get back to you on that. So also, if you have any future topics, we'd like to keep this webinar series going. We're kind of going to do them in 3 or 4 parts, and then we'll take a small break and then go with some more topics. So if you have additional topics you'd like to hear more on, hear from some industry experts, we'd love to line those up for you in the future. So with that being said, the third webinar today is focusing around biosecurity. We have Dr. Seiche Genger from, or sorry, I said that wrong. Dr. Seiche Genger, and I'm going to call her Dr. G from now on because she said I could. And she is a DVM with Hyaline International. So what I'm going to do is kind of turn over the mic to her now, and she's going to give us a little bit of background of who she is, who she works for, and we'll kind of jump into it. So, Seiche?
Perfect. Thanks, Jesse. All right. So yeah, as you said, my name is Dr. Seiche Genger. You can obviously call me Dr. G or whatever else you prefer. I don't take offense. So I work for Hyaline International, which is a poultry genetics company, and I actually cover our territory in Southeast Asia. So I'm normally based overseas, although I'm back in the US right now for the COVID situation. So what that means essentially is that I deal and support with any sort of poultry farm or customer that we may have or service that is in the egg laying business. So those would be table eggs that you would be eating or purchasing for bread products, things like that, liquid egg product, all of that. So I spend a lot of time discussing biosecurity and disease prevention strategies for all sorts of different circumstances, whether that be our poultry lab facilities that I go visit that belong to customers, whether that be hatcheries, farms, and at various different levels of disease risk, right? So there are some things that we would call a specific pathogen-free bird or an SPF bird. That's what most vaccines are produced from, is SPF eggs. And so those facilities obviously need to have an incredibly high level of biosecurity because you have to throw away all of that product if you bring in any particular viruses or infections. And then all the way down to the level of somebody who may have 3,000 birds in their backyard in Indonesia, and that's their livelihood and income, and how they manage their risk with very small or limited resources. So kind of everything top to bottom biosecurity wise I do. I've done that overseas, and then I've also done that in the US for several years before joining Hyaline, where I worked with Cargill as a turkey veterinarian in the States.
Perfect. And we were talking a little bit before we started the webinar. Some people might have caught the end of our conversation, but really in your role with Hyaline, you've mentioned you've had to learn about composting and all kinds of crazy stuff that maybe I'll say a typical DVM would not really have to know about.
Yeah, when I talk to a lot of my colleagues and classmates, right, from vet school, our jobs sometimes are drastically different and then sometimes the same. So yeah, there's nothing really I don't get involved in if it's a question that comes up. So that's anything from construction of poultry houses and ventilation systems to, like I was saying, lighting systems or mass mortality composting, right? How do we deal with a house of birds we need to euthanize when you're looking at 2 million animals at about 1.5 pounds a piece? That's a lot of meat and nitrogen source you have to get rid of, and you can't take it out of a poultry house. So how do we do that? What carbon sources do we bring in? So there's just all sorts of questions that come up, and how do you control every circumstance around that? And it's definitely a strange feeling because everybody looks at you, you're the vet, and they're like, what do we do?
Gotcha. I'm sure there's a few people listening, like, why are we talking about poultry farms and things like that? I promise we'll get to the meat and potatoes of everything, but really to get us started off right, can you give us a little snippet of I'll say the biosecurity procedures or products that you have to use? And maybe we'll migrate into how that might translate to, I'll say, maybe a large or a small animal veterinary practice.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of the stuff's really similar. I think for the scope of this particular meeting, we should talk about the more basic stuff, basic principles, because I think those are going to apply a little bit better. In general, I think the key thing when we talk about biosecurity is remembering that it's about mitigating risk. So in order to mitigate risk, you have to determine what are your greatest risk factors, what are your lowest common denominators that you need to protect your clinic from or a poultry farm from. So if we think about the greatest economic risk, whether that be mortality or political implications of shipping meat or things of that nature for poultry, then we're going to think of avian influenza, right? The 2015 outbreaks of avian influenza that caused just really dramatic economic losses and impact to farmers across the country and also to companies. When we talk about risk for avian influenza, then we sit down and we say, okay, this is a virus. It's transmitted by wild birds. It's something that comes from the outside and goes into the poultry house. So then we choose our biosecurity practices based on that. So for example, we change foot coverings every time we enter a facility. So whatever is in the outside world, because I can't stop a bird from pooping on the outside of the farm, right? And I might track it in on my shoes. So I make sure I put on plastic booties or do a full foot change. Another component of that is foot baths, and that's something that a lot of people are familiar with. Any veterinarians who work with dairy farms are actually fairly familiar with foot baths just for the cows themselves to treat diseases. And it's the same principle that we use disinfectants or something that is going to inactivate viruses or bacteria before we track that into our facility. Another one is so we did shoe coverings, is your clothes that you're wearing, or what people tend to call their PPE, right? Putting on new coveralls, changing clothes. For veterinarians, that's actually your lab coats, as you all know, right? You want to keep the gross stuff on the outside. And then technically we should never wear surgical scrubs outside of the OR because they're supposed to be clean, although we do gown up over that. And so all of that comes into play with what are you trying to do in terms of maintaining the environment that's the right amount of risk for your situation. So changing clothes, right? Because you can carry in something on your clothes, making sure that you wash your hands, all sorts of things like that are going to help you decrease the risk for whatever thing you're trying to protect from.
Sure. And I would say in general, and I'm kind of speaking on behalf of the entire industry as not a DVM, but I assume most of those were kind of things that people were following as procedures now. You mentioned swine flu, or excuse me, bird flu. There's been swine flu. There's been a number of different things that have affected probably more like production farms than the actual, I'll say, DVM world and the veterinary industry itself. I'll say the word COVID-19 has been something crazy. We here at TWC don't think this will be the last thing that anybody ever has to deal with, but it's really been eye-opening to a lot of people going to like a curbside appointment system, things like that. What would you recommend, without putting you on the spot too much, what would you kind of recommend as far as potential products that could go above and beyond, I'll say, the normal for practices now and into the future?
Dealing specifically with things like COVID-19?
Yeah, whether it be policy procedures like our curbside appointment opportunities and things like that, or even additional PPE. I know we discussed a little bit on the phone earlier this week, like UV lights and things like that. We have seen a number of practices do things like that, but as you and I discussed, you kind of have to be all in or you're not really doing what it's intended for. Are there different products and procedures that you could recommend or that you have seen in the past that would be helpful?
Absolutely. No, there's a ton of them. And actually the most critical component, usually what I spend my time doing or having to deal with, is poor structural planning. So there's several different types of biosecurity. And one that's really critical that we talk about a lot is called structural biosecurity. How did you plan your farm? And for you guys, I think this is a key role for you in construction, is helping your clients understand how to plan their clinic. So when we talk about biosecurity, we need to have no backtracking, right? It's about not taking something from one location and pulling it into another. So if that's the case, it makes no sense at all if my sick parvo dog comes in and we follow all the right procedures. Actually, leptospirosis is another great example of this. Let's use lepto. Lepto is a great one. This is my favorite. So leptospirosis causes some renal issues in dogs, can be deadly, can also be transmitted to humans. And so it's one that normally we have to treat as a very separate or more isolated case. What I see in a lot of small animal practices, which makes me absolutely crazy, is that lepto dog comes in the same client exam room, which is fair because we don't know until later that might be what's going on. So all that needs to get cleaned and disinfected and needs a good way to do that. But then when that dog is hospitalized in the kennel, it needs its own room. And it needs its own room that you don't have to walk through the healthy dog room to get to. So they'll have a little isolation room at the back, but the only entrance to that little isolation room goes right past every border that you have or every, other sick or ICU case that's in there, or sometimes it's even in the ICU. And your prospects for cross-contamination are just massive. So when you're planning structurally, you want to ask that question, hey, are you going to have cases here potentially that you need to not have access to other animals to? And let's make sure we have a back door with a separate entrance that doesn't go through our community spaces, if you will. So you can have one technician assigned to that, have a clean location for them to gown up, because they will wear PPE for those kind of cases. And so let's have a clean location where everything dirty can stay in that room. And I'm not going to track that back out into the rest of the hospital. And that room should have a sink in it, right? UV lights in that room might be an awesome thing to have, just to kind of flash sterilize as you're going in. I've seen a lot of things in other countries, a lot of like formaldehyde foggers and stuff. I don't really recommend that as a safety concern for the US. You can get away with it in some other countries that don't have quite as strict regulations. They work fantastic. I love them. Maybe not the right thing to do. But you can have, for those rooms, if you knew you were going to potentially see those cases, high risk areas, or maybe you're going to see a lot of parvo cases and you just want to make sure that you're not tracking that around your hospital, have a separate clean room with a separate entrance, put UV lights in there potentially, put a fogging system in there that has some sort of disinfectant to just quickly kind of coat everything when you walk out of the room. It's just an automatic spray. A sink in there to make sure you can wash up and be clean and leave anything inside. Make sure you have access from that room. If you're going to have laundry, that can go straight to the laundry, and you're not having to walk into that room to do your laundry or take that dirty laundry and carry it back to the hospital without appropriate planning. So that's a good example of some above and beyond things you can do for the structural component in the beginning, is plan out what you want to do for those kinds of cases.
Sure. And I'm going a little rogue here. I'm going off script a little bit. In our industry, we travel quite often, so we're on planes on a regular basis. We've seen a lot of those airlines implement some more fogging systems and things like that, kind of a quick fogger system. Beyond that type of product, is there anything else that you've seen throughout your travels that you might recommend for somebody to look into?
I mean, in terms of traveling or just for their clinic itself?
I would say for their clinic in general.
Okay. Again, I think it's all about what kind of risk that you want to mitigate or what your concerns are. So if you're concerned about something like COVID-19 and you really want to protect your employees and yourself from that situation, then you're looking at negative pressure systems for airflow, right? And HEPA filtration like we use on airplanes in order to capture as much of that particulate matter as you can and prevent the spread of things like aerosols. So when we talk about different systems, I think the ones we know that generally work on most organisms are going to be UV light, appropriate air filtration, and maintaining appropriate flow through, right? And all of that, the most critical component, you can put in all the equipment you want, but if your employees don't buy in or they don't understand how that works, you're just going to contaminate the whole hospital or the whole hatchery or the whole whatever it is, because you can have the best biosecurity you want, but if somebody takes that lepto dog and walks him right back through your front room, I mean, you just messed it all up. Or my favorite example, I've got farmers, I love them to death, but they got a great foot bath. It's beautiful. It looks great. And they say, yeah, I use this foot bath every day. And I go out and check it. They've never changed the disinfectant. It's full of manure and other stuff. And I'm like, this does not work. You're disinfecting nothing. I love that you're stepping in it and now tracking all of that extra stuff into the house. That's beautiful. Or another favorite, biosecurity is inconvenient. There's a veterinarian, John Glisson, said that. He's a brilliant man. And John Glisson said, biosecurity is inconvenient. That's what it is. So if your employee doesn't like the fogger and they're like, I'm not using that, then they're never going to use it and you're contaminated all the time. So you spend all this money for this beautiful equipment, but your employees don't have buy-in. The same thing goes, beautiful setup. I've had to walk through like railings to make sure I get fully disinfected, get all the way around, step in my foot bath, change my boots, and my grower walks all the way around the back of the house, comes in through the back door where there's nothing and meets me inside. So those kind of practices, I think, are really critical to think about when we talk about how we're going to set it up. So there are tons of systems that can help you. There are so many tools available. At the end of the day, it's about employee buy-in. And then the other thing I would say I've learned is, as the head of your clinic, you set the example. And it's just like they say in veterinary school or in undergrad or anything else, you're only going to remember about 30% of what you learn. I think the best employees I've ever had are only going to do about 80% of what I do as the leader. So that's the other critical thing to remember. If you don't want to do it as the head of your practice, your employees are not going to do it. And you need to create an atmosphere and environment that encourages that in a positive way. I would say from my experiences, negative reinforcement on those sorts of things is not successful. It doesn't work. You have to establish buy-in and help people understand why. Did that kind of answer your question, or did I go way too off topic?
No, I think you did a great job. Again, I went very off script, so I was kind of throwing you a zinger there. I actually have one more that I came up with, and I will preface this. I know you are not an architect. We are a design build construction company, so a lot of things that we end up discussing in plans, and more so lately, which may become more popular, are things like a pharmacy drive-up window, multiple exits. Like you said, if somebody needs to bring an animal into isolation wards, typically we have an exterior door there, but maybe it ends up being a whole exterior way to get into treatment for other animals and things like that. So not everyone is going through the normal lobby, and then the animal is handed off to the staff and going that way. Curbside appointments have been very popular now. I could actually see those continuing, not where to be curbside only, but things like that. And telemedicine, we have a number of clients that are doing the telemedicine stuff, and I'm kind of roping in all 3 webinars that we've had so far. But I thought it was very interesting listening to you earlier before the call on all of your travels and all of the different places that you've been. So this is kind of a zinger question, and I don't know if you'll have an answer, but beyond the things that I've mentioned, what have you seen that has been the most in your mind, just like, wow, I can't believe they're doing that. Everybody should do this.
Whether everybody should be doing that. What's the best thing I've seen? Oh, I thought you were going to ask me the worst thing.
We won't get into too many horror stories.
Oh, God, I've got so many.
Maybe we'll have time for one. So.
Oh, Lord. Okay. So what is the best thing that I've seen? You know, my favorite thing that I've seen is actually I actually like the formaldehyde ones, although I don't think you could do it in the US. They have these boxes. So we have, most of our farms, they should have fences around them, right, to prevent people from just walking on and off, because you can carry in disease. It's about keeping some people out, let's not lie, but it's also about just keeping disease off the farm. But people forget every single thing you bring on the farm with you. If you just went duck hunting and you threw your phone or dropped it in the goose you just opened or something, your phone's contaminated. So that is probably my favorite thing. I don't know how relevant it is to small and all practices or what you might want to disinfect, but we have boxes, and you put your phone, your keys, your sunglasses, anything that's handheld carry you're going to bring in with you, because normally we'll actually shower in and shower out of these farms, so everything stays outside, full new clothes that are always clean, only on the farm or inside. But they have these boxes, you open up the door and it's full 360 UV lights, or you have a formaldehyde fogging system in there. Everybody's stuff goes in, it gets full contact time, it sits in there while you shower through. It's just a really nice way of disinfecting things you don't think about. A great example, you know, people have to bring their lunch to work, those sorts of things, and we need a way to disinfect them, and sometimes they don't. Well, if they have contact with backyard birds at home, they can easily bring in avian influenza or something else that's on their lunchbox, and we need to manage that. So that's probably the best thing I've seen. I liked the ones, I've worked with those in Honduras, actually. Those are the best ones I've seen. I've seen different variations since, but the formaldehyde fogging boxes in Honduras were spot on.
Very cool. I've not heard of anything like that, so that's very unique. Since you asked, or since you brought it up, what's the worst thing you've seen? What's one horror story? We have a quick 3 minutes.
Oh, a quick 3 minutes. I went to a farm in Indonesia in the northern Sumatra, and I got really excited actually at first because we're walking up the road to the farm, and I was like, oh, it's a monkey. I'm so excited it's a monkey, because I'm like, oh, there's a wild monkey, right? No, they just bought a monkey. And I asked why they bought a monkey. They said, well, it's a lucky monkey. And I said, oh, so they had a monkey on the farm right next to the birds, which can carry all sorts of diseases and problems. And I don't know why you have a monkey on the farm. So that's probably my favorite one so far, is they had a lucky monkey on the farm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So if your clinic needs a lucky monkey, I know where you can find one.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen any questions come in just yet, so I feel like we're being very thorough, and that's why there's no questions.
Or incredibly boring, one or the other.
One or the other. I'm going to say thorough, because I believe we're being entertaining very much so right now. I have one question that I had left on my docket to ask today, and it's kind of a tough one because it's basically predicting the future. You've been through a number of things in the biosecurity industry, like you mentioned, bird flu, swine flu, probably things that we maybe never even have heard of before. And I know it doesn't directly translate to the veterinary world, but knowing that COVID-19 really put this on everybody's agenda now, it's changed the face or the industry upside down for the last 3+ months. Nobody really knows when it's going to go away. Nobody knows what I'll say the new normal is going to look like. But biosecurity has been a big topic on a lot of people's lists, and all the way from how do I make my current clinic better to how do I design my new facility. We've had a number of people that we've had design changes during construction because this has come up. Where do you see this morphing the animal care business 5 years down the road or further? Any speculation on that?
I think a lot of things that you've mentioned are really important and really critical. That's where I see a lot of things going in the small animal communities right now. I've got tons of friends that actually work with practice management and development of those sorts of plans and how to improve the services that we provide to small animal patients or large animal patients. And a big one is, what is really an important visit that requires a full set of time in the exam room? At the end of the day, nobody likes to talk about money, but the value of the veterinarian is diagnosis and surgical skills, right? In general, everything else should be done by a technician. And so to maximize the profitability of a practice, you have to maximize the efficiency of your time with your doctorate degree, right? Those are your expensive people. So hire other labor. You want good technicians. You want to pay them appropriately to retain them, right? But at the same time, you need to maximize doctor efficiency. And so when you look at that, looking at drop-off appointments, that curbside pickup is fantastic. You can really improve your flow through if you have the space for those dogs, because now you're not taking up an exam room. You're not taking up a whole bunch of time to just speak and have that one-on-one with an owner. We should have those visits, right? Because you need to maintain that relationship and that level of trust. But at the same time, curbside pickup is something that should continue. It's easy for your clients and it's easy for you as a practice. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. And then I also think we're going to see a lot more telemedicine, because it's really nice to be able to deal with something over the phone rather than get up out of bed at 1 a.m. for, something and schlep your way into the clinic. So I think telemedicine is definitely going to increase. I think the reason, to be fair, that it hasn't increased in the past is because we've had a tremendous level of restriction from state boards and regulations, not so much from the veterinarians themselves. We've just been told we can't. And now all the state is suddenly realizing, oh, no, we think you can. And that's going to open up some more opportunities for us as veterinarians to manage our cases and clients with a little bit more of our own feelings on what an appropriate relationship is. And I think that's a really positive impact.
Good. Well, thank you for that. You've been very informative. I anticipate having some follow-up questions here after our webinar and after a few people have been able to view it. It is being recorded and we'll put it on our website. Another shameless plug there. So people will probably view it in the future. If we have enough questions, we'd love to have you back, because you are just a plethora of information. And it's been very informative to me. I'm hoping that everybody else has had a chance to view this, has gotten some good information out of it as well. So thank you, Dr. G, for that. We won't keep anyone longer than we need them. But again, if you have questions, feel free to hit up our website, click on the Contact Us tab, and there's an email address there that you can send questions into. We will have our 4th installment of this webinar series a week from today at 1:30 Central, focusing primarily on the financial industry, how things have been impacted with, again, COVID-19. And then, of course, if you have any additional questions, topics, things like that, we would love to continue this series in the future. So thank you again, Dr. G. We appreciate you being on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.